Hello, everyone, and I'm Rodrigo. I'm your host for the CyberVerse Business Report podcast. This is the place where we talk about the business of technology and the technology of the business. We talk about the transformative power of technology and the impact that has in our society and in everyone's lives. And with me today, we have Brian Gallagher, CEO of CodeLock. And Brian has, I'm truly in awe of the story of the creation of CodeLock. So, Brian, why won't you share with us the story of CodeLock and the genesis of CodeLock?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, and it's great to be talking to you and your audience today. So, yeah, CodeLock was a solution to a problem that we didn't know existed until December of 2020. And in fact, the first company that I started with my business partner was an AI ML, big data company. And we were doing some work in the commercial sector and with the federal government as well. And very specifically, we were working with the Department of Homeland Security on a problem, looking at drone pieces and parts coming from the US and trying to track and trace with a blockchain-based system, where all these parts were going. And the same week that we had a big meeting lined up with two of their undersecretaries, their CIO and their CISO, what happens? SolarWinds gets announced. And I remember this very specifically because...
Brian, sorry to interrupt you, because
sure, yeah.
we try to keep here about the technology and the business of technology. Can you, in 60 seconds, tell us what is this SolarWinds that happened a few years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason why it's referred to as SolarWinds is because there was a cybersecurity company. There is a cybersecurity company called SolarWinds, and they had a product that pushed out to about 18,000 different users, both government and commercials. It was ironically a cybersecurity product. And what happened is the Russians actually were able to get into their product and do what was called a supply chain attack. And this is something that most of the industry has never even heard of or thought of in the past, but I mean, brilliant from a hacking perspective. And what that ultimately looks like is you go in and you expose or compromise or put malware onto software at a developer, somebody who's building software. And then that person is going to take that compromised software and send it out to the world, send it out to their clients. So by attacking one source in that supply chain, you get to then push it out, the corrupted software out to, to millions. And this is the first time we've seen that at a nation state level, meaning from another country doing something to attack the United States very specifically.
Fantastic. It never ceases to amaze me how many variations of the Trojan horse we can see in today's digital world.
100%. And here's an interesting stat for your audience. We're seeing a 633% increase year over year right now in supply chain attacks. And this is something that wasn't even on anybody's radar prior to 2020. And now it's probably one of the biggest topics in cybersecurity everywhere.
Very good. So you're in a meeting, you on a different topic, talking about AI and ML, and then this hits and a light bulb goes into your head, I guess.
Yeah, so we don't even go into the meeting yet. We know, I think it's about a Monday. We know we have that meeting later in the week. And I call up my contact, who was the Undersecretary of Intelligence for DHS at the time, and ask him, hey, do you still want to meet with us? I'm sure you guys are preoccupied. And he says, nope, it's already on the schedule, come on in. So I tell my team, listen, they're going to care less what we have to talk about, on our canned speech that we're planning to go in on. So how do we make the best out of this opportunity in this audience? And the next day, my business partner, JT, Dr. Kosman, calls me up, and I'm in my gym working out. He's actually in his gym working out. We had a little competition thing going on to see who could be the fittest. And he says, hey, Brian, I figured it out. And I'm thinking, JT, you figured what out? You figured out where you're going to go get lunch, what you want in your hamburger today, make sure you get extra fries because we're having this whole competition on losing weight. And he says, no, I figured out how we could have stopped SolarWinds. And so I start listening to him. And he starts asking me some questions. And I'm a former law enforcement agent. I was with the United States Secret Service officer, as was JT. He was a police officer. And so he starts kind of teasing me out and saying, well, when you go to a crime scene, what do? You look for evidence. Well, when you find evidence, what do you do with it? Well, you bag it and you tag it and you create a chain of custody. And that chain of custody is good all the way up to the courtroom. And so he says, well, Brian, why aren't we doing that with software? And I told him that's a great question. I mean, software isn't normally built just by one person. It's built by a collection of people within an organization who have often taken software from other open source locations and pulled it in. So you have this spider web of zeros and ones ultimately that create the program that you're actually using. And why can't we know every developer that actually had their hands on that project at what point in time? And that became the basis of CodeLock. So, I told him, don't say another word. I'm going to get our attorneys on the phone. We had our patent filed within 7 days of the SolarWinds announcement. We walked into that meeting with DHS and said, we've solved all your problems in the world. We just can't tell you about it until the patents are filed. And, about a week or two later, provided them all the documentation. They had their science and technology group do a review, came back with a glowing endorsement. Rodrigo actually got this out of their legal department. In writing, they came out and said that CodeLock has the capability to stop the most sophisticated criminal malware. And they even said it would be effective against nation states. And so, that's kind of a leading endorsement that we roll with and have been very proud about.
That is fantastic. It always amazes me that the parallels between the physical world and the digital world, and that's why I like to focus here really on recreating in the digital world on cybersecurity all the things that you do in the real world. And I guess nobody is better positioned than you that were part of the Secret Service, that were solving crimes in the real physical world, and now you transition to the digital world. That's definitely a fantastic trajectory. So what does the future hold for CodeLock and all of this supply chain problem that really affects? I mean, let's look at China, let's look at Russia. This is a real problem today.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I mean, I think we know that cybersecurity as a whole is only going to grow. I mean, the threats are going to change, and the amount of data that's being used and the amount of the world that's digitized is only going to continue to grow and grow and grow. So we're constantly going to be finding new threats and looking for new ways to combat them and fight them. I think for CodeLock, though, really what we're seeing in the last couple of years has been a shift for businesses. And some of that has been pushed by regulatory change. Now, that could be anything from the recent SEC regulations for publicly traded companies that mandating people sit on boards that actually have cybersecurity experience to be able to bring more protection to shareholders. Or it could be things like the executive order that President Biden signed in May of 2021 that forced the federal government to look at software supply chain security and how to better protect it. And so what we've seen since then have been more regulatory changes, things that along the lines of, if you're a business that either sells software or a product with software in it, to even include firmware to the federal government, you now must comply with these new software standards. If you don't get to sell it to the government, and the government's the biggest buyer of product in the world. And so, they came up with a way to tag the pocketbook, the bank account to actually taking the changes seriously. And the other thing that we've seen, there's been this statement in the market called shift left in software development. And the mindset behind that is historically developers and security engineers wouldn't work together. Developers would build their code, it would be done, and then the security side of the house would try to figure out how to protect it and keep it safe. But we're finding that that's broken. It's kind of like, building an airplane and putting a bunch of people in it. And as the airplane's crashing, trying to figure out how to fix it, right? You can't do that. You need to think about how to build it in the first place with security in mind. And so that's really where this industry is moving to. How do we implement controls sooner? How do we understand more information around the development process, who's touched the software, to better protect it in the back end?
Yeah, I mean that I think is really the way to go, because I've always felt that in most organizations and in most development organizations, security was always an afterthought. It was a bolt-on that you put, like you were saying, after you produced the software, then came the security engineers and bolt-on security. Whereas we're moving to a world where you need to start thinking about security and digital security, especially from the moment you start building your assets. Or otherwise, if you don't do security by design, it will never be effective because it was not designed with security in mind. So I think that's right on the money, and that's a trend that I see in the marketplace, really putting in an emphasis on security on all the digital products.
Right.
And one aspect of it is the role that for example blockchain has to play in this chain of custody. So
Sure.
you guys are using blockchain technology.
Yeah, let me go in and explain that a little bit. So kind of going back to that conversation with the Department of Homeland Security, my team actually had a contract with the Department of Defense, and we were working on cryptocurrency tracking and tracing. Can we create an algorithm, which we did, to be able to identify illicit crypto wallets and find the bad guys and connect those dots? And so we had a very good background and understanding of how blockchain, which is the basis of cryptocurrency, works. Now, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if you throw out the word blockchain, people were throwing money at you. But over time, you realize that there are some pros and cons to it. And one of the cons of blockchain is it can be slow and expensive and need a big infrastructure to run. So we didn't want to build CodeLock onto a blockchain. What we wanted to do was mimic the foundation of how blockchain works, this ability to create an interlinked ledger, to be able to have blocks of code that then get interlinked together and using hash values. So these encrypted algorithms to be able to, or functions to be able to know if there's been a change to that block of code. So what we ultimately do is we'll take a block of code and we'll interlink them together. And so if there ends up being an unauthorized change, it's going to break the chain, hence the blockchain, and tell you exactly where in the code that the change occurred and what you need to go and look at it. That's kind of the basis of ledger systems that blockchain uses, but we're not doing it on, say, Ethereum or something along those lines where you actually have some of the negative aspects that go with it.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And how all of these things tied together, it's really amazing. And because it's 2023 and we can't have a show about technology or security without talking about it. What's the impact that technology, the AI technology, the chat GPTs are going to have in digital security and cybersecurity? Is it going to make it harder to defend or easier to defend? Are we going to have better security, or is it going to just make better attackers?
I think it's going to be a combination of both. We get people that get really scared about quantum computing and, what happens to encryption with quantum computing. You're going to be able to break everything. Well, on the flip side, you can use quantum computing to then actually create security as well. So there's kind of this, I think it's going to make it easier for attackers to attack in a lot of different ways. And so therefore, I think the security industry is going to continue to need to mold and change and stay ideally ahead of what's occurring in that first. So, will it make it easier to attack? Yeah, it will. Will it also make it easier to defend? Yes, it will. And I think when you're looking at this space and this industry, you have to keep that in mind. A tool that worked 5 years ago isn't necessarily going to be a tool that works today, provided it hasn't caught up to the times.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right about that one. I've up until very recently, I was obviously working at a higher education company, and very close to my heart is the education topic. And
Yes.
I believe that with the pace of technology and the innovation of technology, I think every one of us has to look forward to multiple careers and multiple reinventions and re-educations in our future, because technology is just changing so fast. And one topic that has been talking a lot about is this concept of the autonomous security operation centers. How far do you think we're away from these autonomous security operation centers, where you essentially have these detectors and these sensors and this artificial intelligence that detects these attacks? Do you think that is within the next few years, or it's still something further out in the future?
Yeah, so one thing I'll say is I never think we're going to be at a point where there's full autonomous. I think that when we look at artificial intelligence and machine learning, we actually like to take the term AI for artificial intelligence and flip it to IA for intelligence augmentation. And so we're big believers in what's referred to as human and training or interaction when it comes to any type of autonomy. The biggest and fastest supercomputer in the world is between your ears, literally still your brain. And so we think that with the large amounts of big data that are coming from sensors and tools, 100% automation and AI plays a part, and we need to see more organizations and more companies moving towards it. But I don't think it's ever going to be fully autonomous where the human's not involved. You're still going to need them to come in and tweak and train and adjust and be involved in the near term. 20 years from now, not exactly sure, but I think in the next 5 to 10, you're going to see that happening. With that being said, you can't just throw more people at the problem. We have a deficiency around the world in cybersecurity experts. They get burnt out. I think 1 out of 3 chief information security officers tend to leave their jobs over the course of just a couple of years, just because of the stress and the burnout and the amount of things getting thrown at them. So you need automation, you need AI to come in and handle the things that they're very capable of doing, whether that's looking at natural language processing or bringing in robotic process automation or intelligence process automation into the discussion to really pick up those minute tasks that are draining and too much for the human brain to do.
Yes, the singularity is near. So what does the future hold for Brian Gallagher? What are you looking forward to over the next 3 to 5 years, to put an AI chip in your brain?
No, I hope I will never get to that point. I always think of the total recall. There's a chip in my dog, and that's about as far as I've gone in case she gets lost. So, what I really want to see is I want to make an impact on what we're doing initially right now in software supply chain. But I've always been working in the security world. I started really just prior to 9/11, and then after 9/11 getting into national security. And you mentioned kind of that intersection of physical security and software security. That was me to a T. And I was doing physical security and saw this threat and how we're plugging all these things into networks and the cyber threat around that. And that's what got me into this space. And I think what I want to do in 3 to 5 years from now is continue to work with companies on identifying what these problems are and coming up with frontier solutions to be able to protect against them. That's kind of who I am as a person and who I think I'll always be involved with.
Fantastic. I couldn't think about a better example of somebody that personifies that merge of the physical world and the digital world, from Secret Service to defender of the digital world. So this was another episode of the CyberVerse Business Report podcast. I'm Rodrigo, your host for the cyber world. It was such a pleasure to have Brian Gallagher here with us today. So let's keep merging those two worlds and seeing the singularity. Please join me next week when I bring in another exciting guest. Thank you, everybody, and see you out there in the digital world.